Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Nick Talks. This episode's amazing guest is somebody you've all definitely heard of, Calvin Robinson, who I interviewed live on stage about a couple of months ago, just before Christmas, in Manchester City Centre. Calvin, as you know, is a presenter on GB News. He's a political commentator. He's a sensible conservative voice where one is needed. And more recently, he's become a deacon at the Free Church of England. So first of all, welcome, Calvin, to the show.
Thank you very much, Nick. It's good to be here with you again.
Thank you very much. Let's start off with a couple of years ago, you interviewed me on your podcast about defund the BBC, because that was a big thing at the time. Where are we up to with that? What's going on with that? Are you still involved? I see bits of it now, but it doesn't seem to be as big as it was. Could you give us an update on defund the BBC?
Yeah, very good question. There were four of us involved, really and truly. Becca Ryan is the woman that runs it, and she's very much still running it. Myself, Darren, and Liam all ended up at GB News at some point or another. Liam's now moved on. I think he's gone to Westminster. But Darren and I are still at GB News. So most of our time is actually spent on GB. But I'm still very much in favour of the cause of defund the BBC. We've had a few wins and a few losses over the years. I think Dominic Cummings was very much in favour of the idea. So when he was running things with Boris Johnson, we saw some promise. We saw a few policy suggestions, but then they got dropped with different prime ministers, and we seem to, we have a new prime minister every week now, so we don't know where we stand with that. But it doesn't look like the BBC is going to get defunded anytime soon. However, Channel 4 looks to be sold off, and that will start motions in order so we can keep pushing for the BBC to find a new business model too.
For people who are not aware of defund the BBC and what your main aim is, apart from defunding the BBC, what is the sense behind this campaign?
Well, it's just that the business model around the BBC is so outdated in that it's almost a tax. Like to watch any live TV on any channel, you have to pay the BBC. Or even if you just watch stuff that's streamed, if you're watching it in real time, you have to pay the BBC, even if you don't watch the BBC. And that wouldn't be as bad. The tax itself wouldn't be as bad as how they implement that tax. As in, they target vulnerable people, they target minority groups, and they target women quite a lot as well. And they push what people call who knock on your doors, the enforcers. They're like not tax collectors. What's the word for them, Nick? I've got mental. Yeah, thank you. They push bailiffs on people. They push people into the magistrates' courts. The magistrates' courts are clogged up with people paying TV licenses. And essentially, I just don't think it's a model that works. I think if you like the BBC content, you should be able to opt in and choose to pay for it, like you do with Netflix or Sky or Virgin or pretty much anything these days. The idea that you have to by default pay them, otherwise they'll come knocking on your door and send you to court, it doesn't seem very British to me.
It isn't. And let's say they wanted to keep the license fee. Let's say let's say they would argue that it's the best way of doing it. A fairer way of doing it would be putting an extra tax on new TVs.
Right. And even then,
I disagree with that, but that'd be fairer than forcing people into magistrates' court and into debt.
But even whatever funding model they choose, we still have to ask the question: do we want a public service broadcaster? Do we want that model? And if so, what should they be doing? So if you look at their remit, they're supposed to inform and educate and entertain. And actually, most of the time, they're pushing propaganda. There's a very, very clear metropolitan liberal elite bias at the BBC. And unfortunately, I think most people are sick and tired at this point of having what I call social justice warrior nonsense, or some people call virtue signaling, just shoved down your throat in every single program. We even see EastEnders telling people to get the COVID jab and stuff like that. It's like, stop, calm down. What are you trying to do here? What is your objective?
Yeah, so it's worse than just how they're funded. It's become a propaganda arm of not only the government, but also this woke narrative that's infiltrated almost every organisation, institution across the country.
Absolutely. That's the problem with it. And that's why we're fighting against it. And I think it all comes down to freedom and choice. People should be free to choose to use the BBC if they want to or not. It's really that simple.
And the technology is there now with streaming services, and the technology is so advanced that you could charge people for watching the BBC what they wanted to watch. You could charge them just to watch EastEnders if that's all they wanted to watch off the whole program, then just charge them for that.
Yeah, pay per program. That's a good idea. But also, they could sell their content worldwide. To some degree, they do have certain deals in different countries, but they could just open up the platform and say, wherever you are in the world, you can choose to use iPlayer. Right now, iPlayer is restricted to the United Kingdom. I don't see a reason why it should be.
Yeah, technology is moving so fast. When I worked for the council 15 years ago, we were looking then at putting microchips in wheelie bins and then charging residents on their weight of their bin.
Wow. Okay.
And that was 15 years. I mean, it never got implemented because the cowards don't implement anything, but that's what they were looking at. So technology, that was 15 years old technology. Imagine that. Yep, every year you get your bill and it's worked out by every time your bin is emptied, the lorry weighs that wheelie bin.
That's ridiculous. So you'd only buy things that aren't heavy. You buy packaging that's very light. I don't know if that works.
Well, what that would encourage, and this is why they probably never implemented, it encourages fly tipping, that the council then have to go out and clear up for thousands of pounds. So it's not cost benefit for the council because not all people, but some people will go, I'm not paying for that bin. I will just save it up in my car and I'll throw it on a country lane. I'll tip it on this quiet street down an entry somewhere. So that's probably why the council's never implemented it.
Well, probably a good thing then.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So that's updated now with defunded BBC, which I'm a supporter of. What some people probably don't know about you is you used to be a school teacher. So I'd like to talk about that. How did you get into, did you always want to be a school teacher? How did you get into that? Why did you leave? And what did you learn by being a teacher? Because I was never a teacher, but I fell into youth work, working with youth workers. At one point, I was based in a school looking at behavioural problems. So I know how schools work. I especially know how failing schools work because they're the ones I was based in. What was your learning from school? So how did you get involved with being a teacher? Did you always want to be a teacher?
Goodness, no. I avoided it. My mother's a teacher, so I always thought that's something I definitely don't want to do. I went to university to study computer science and games programming, and I did website development and mobile app development. I did kind of geeky coding stuff, and we struggled in business. Really, we not as in growing a business, but in recruiting homegrown talent. We outsourced everything to Eastern Asia and Eastern Europe, and I didn't think that was right. And yes, it's cheaper over there, but that's not the reason we went over there. There just wasn't any British talent really. People kept coming to us with CVs that said, "Yeah, we can code," but they couldn't actually code. They couldn't do anything. They had no knowledge, no skills, just degrees. I'm like, well, what's going on in our system over here that people have the paperwork, but they don't have the stuff to back it up? And I was either arrogant or naive enough to believe that I could make a difference. So I thought, let me go to teaching and give it a try and see what I could do. And I loved it. I found my passion. Education is definitely my passion. It's something extremely interesting. I think we could solve a lot of societal problems by looking at how we educate young people. Right now, we're doing a terrible job at it, and I think that's the result of that is that the country's going down the pan. So if we focus more on education and more on early years and more on forming young minds, we'd be in a better place.
My experience from inner city schools, not all inner city schools, some are doing exceptionally well, but the ones I worked with and the ones I worked within, the issue was discipline. That was the core issue. If you cannot enforce discipline in a school, nothing else can be done. So when kids won't sit in a class and are wandering around the school all day because they're good enough to turn up to school, so these aren't necessarily the kids are involved in crime, or some of them are, but they want to turn up to school. We're just not giving them the environment that's beneficial to them, for them to want to learn. And what I learned was primary schools are semi-okay, not as great as they should be, but most kids enjoy primary school because as you got older, you move up the hierarchy. You're at the next year up, you're bigger than everybody else. And the small, all the teachers know your name, you know all the kids' name. The issue is when you go from the last year of primary school into the first year of a failing secondary school. All of a sudden, you go from a big fish in a small pond to a tiny fish in a huge pond. You're 11, you're dealing with 16-year-olds who look like grown men when you're 11. Everything changes. You then kick up a bit of a fuss, maybe, or you drop out, consciously, you drop out of lessons. Within a couple of months, you're behind, or maybe your primary school was bad, so therefore you're not at their level anyway. And all of a sudden, especially boys, then go, I'm giving up. And they've given up in the first couple of months. And then we make them go every day for 5 years. We tell them every day, you're failing, you're failing. Why can't you be more like the girls? Put your hand up if you want to speak. Stop shouting. Stop toy fighting. What are you doing? Be more like the girls. Sit down, behave yourself. And we wonder why, when they leave at 16, they're angry, they're disenfranchised. It's because we've tortured them for 5 years. We've told them every day, you're not good enough. You should be more like a girl. The boys who succeed are more like girls because they've learned to play the game. They become over feminized. And it's all about group hugs and feelings. Boys want to compete. Boys want to be better than everybody else. There's nothing wrong with that when it's controlled. They were my lessons of working in schools.
Yeah, no, we're doing kids a disservice because there is a lack of discipline in schools, and we're not creating environments where children can learn. And I think a lot of that is down to this child-centered approach that the liberal progressives have been pushing. The idea that children direct their own learning, and we're not there to teach them; we're to facilitate their learning. And actually, I'm like, no, we are the subject matter experts. We are there to impart knowledge, and to do that, we need firm discipline. We need order. And you're right in terms of girls and boys. They learn differently and they interact with the world differently, especially at that age. You see the difference between boys and girls quite clearly, much more so than in adults. But boys do need a competitive environment, and we quash rather competitiveness in schools these days. Everyone has to be a winner. Everyone gets a medal for participation. It's ridiculous. Even sports days, like there's no first, second, and third place anymore in a lot of these schools. It's just well done. It's taking part that matters. No, it's not taking part that matters. It's winning. It's working hard. It's accomplishing something. It's achieving something. It's being the best you can be. And that is a good thing. It's good for the community. It's good for the environment. It's good for the world. It's not just good for you personally. We need men to strive.
Yeah, we also need those young boys as well to fail at certain things at school, to fail at the sports day, because you go home that day going, don't like that. I don't like how this feels. I don't like Jimmy beating me. Do you know what I'm going to do about it? I'll be better next time we have something like that because I don't like this feeling. But when you fail and you go, oh, it doesn't matter. Oh, give me a big hug, mum. It's like, well, no one's going to give you a hug, mum, when you're 22 and you're competing for a job and you're competing in the world. We're teaching children in general, but especially boys, how to give up and not.
Young men end up with depression and mental health issues because they're not used to failure. They don't know how to cope with it because they've never done it in their childhood. And you're absolutely right. To succeed in life, you have to fail. There's no way to get anywhere in life without failing. So we have to encourage that. We have to encourage a trial and error approach. And that is how you learn not only, like you say, how to get better at things, but also to learn what things you're not good at, because not everyone's good at everything. And that is another issue in education, in that everyone has to go to university, everyone has to be academic. Not everyone is academic. It's a ridiculous pipe dream that Tony Blair installed and everyone since him has followed through with. Most children should not go to university. The academia is for the intellectual. Everyone else should find something else, and vocations and technical qualifications and sport and music and the arts. There's so much to the world that isn't academic, and we're letting them down again in that area too.
We are, and we've also let down the ones who are intellectual because we've devalued all degrees now. So if you come out of university with a first and you are amazing, when I employ people now, I don't even look at degrees. I have people come and I go, well, yeah, that's fine, because a degree now tells me nothing about your intelligence, about your skills, about your logical. It tells me nothing because I've employed enough people with degrees to realize worthless.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been devalued because it's been watered down. There are just too many of them. And it's because everyone has to go to universities. We have too many universities, and we have too many courses in those universities. What we need to do is cut the funding to them and say, look, if your degree, if your qualifications that you're giving out are worthless, such as social media studies or gender studies or anything like that, then you won't get funding for it from the government. We just don't do that anymore. And then the universities will stop offering those silly floppy degrees.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's become a business. That's all the universities care about, is it's become a business. Every young person who turns up now is worth 9 grand a year. And that's all you're not that clever, you're not that academic. We'll create a special course for you because you're worth 27 grand over 3 years. We'll make sure you pass because we want the other people who shouldn't be here. We want them to come next year. So you've got to pass. Otherwise, people will stop coming. And it's a business. I've got a friend of mine who's worked in this field for decades. And he said something that I've never forgot. He said, students, so pardon?
You just forgot.
I want to make sure I get it right. He says university students used to be the product. Now they're just the customer.
Yeah, it's very good.
Well,
and we see an increasing number of foreign students as well because they pay a lot more. So universities want as many foreign students as possible, which is why a lot of our universities are just full of Chinese spies, to be honest.
And that's something else that needs to be looked at because from what I've read and understand, a lot of the technology from universities is being stolen by these so-called spies, is being sent home, infiltrating different parts of government, different parts of society. But let's not get into so-called conspiracy theories about the evil Chinese. Let me give you a quick example of something I did of an example of what we're talking about for a school. So there was one school I was working in, and on a Friday night we ran a youth club at the school for anybody in the area. You didn't have to go to that school. And it was fairly well attended, 50, 60 young people would come along. And we had one young lad, 15 years old, from a Romanian family, English perfect. I don't think he was born here, but he's English perfect, been here a long time. And he started volunteering in helping us at the youth club, especially with the younger kids. He was really good at calming them down and telling them what to do and how to play table tennis. And he was really, really good. And at one of the meetings at the school, I said, I won't say his name, but this lad, he's been volunteering, he's a great help. And all the teachers stared at me and went, this kid? I went, yeah. He went, he's one of our worst kids in the school. I'm constantly kicking him out of my class. And I said, he's really bright. I said, we know he's really bright, but he's got a really bad attitude. Poor, and that, to be fair, that was true because I saw that later on, especially in his classrooms. And I asked him one day, I says, why do you mess around in class? Why are you always being kicked out? He went, what's the point of school? I went, well, you'll get an education, you'll get exams, he goes, I know what I'm doing when I leave at 16. I'm going to go work with my dad. My dad's a scrap metal collector. He drives around in a van and people leave out cookers and stuff like that and he picks them up and scraps them. I'm doing that with my dad, with the rest of my brothers. That's what we do, family business. I went, you could achieve so much more. Going, that's what I want to do. I went, that's fair enough. But if you get an education, maybe then you could expand that business because you'll know how to do your taxes, you'll know HR law, you'll know I said, he went, I'm not doing any of that. But he carried on volunteering and he was a great volunteer at the youth club. And then I'd left the school then and he did his GCSEs and one of the teachers phoned me up and said he didn't turn up to any exam and left at 16. And he would have passed his exams because he was very, very bright. There's a kid that if we had a different type of schooling, he would have been successful. But we only offered him the stuff he didn't want to do. We offered him geography and science. He's like, I don't want to do any of that. I know what I want to do. And it's not a life I'd have picked for him, but who are we to be picking lives for kids? That's down to him and his parents. But we could have offered him other stuff to do in the school that he could have left and been a lot more successful, a lot more prepared for the world. And we didn't. We just one size fits all and we let him down.
That's an interesting one. I tend to think that what we're teaching in school is good for everyone. I do think a one size fits all approach is good at that age, up to 16, and then after that you have the selection process of choice. But you don't. I think we need to have a bigger influence of what Americans call homeschooling or home educating, so that people that don't necessarily want to send their kids to school can just teach them at home what they want to teach them. Because it's the parents' responsibility first and foremost to educate their children, and schools are there to help. But if you don't want your kids to have the same education, you want them to have something different, you should have that option. It should be up to parents. And we should have more different types of schools, absolutely, so that parents get a choice of where they send their kids. But for a kid like that, the problem there is that, first of all, he doesn't value education. And again, that's a letdown of the school, but also of his parents. But secondly, his disruptive behavior is interfering with everyone else's education of the people around him. And that's good for nobody.
Yeah, no, exactly. Homeschooling, I I'm sat on the fence with homeschooling because I understand it can be great for some kids if your parents really want to do it. But I've seen so many schools unofficially say to parents, if you're sick of us coming and fining you for your child not attending school, who's dragging down our attendance records, isn't going to pass any exams, so there's no use to my league table. If you want me to stop fining you, why don't you sign this form and homeschool him?
Really? Does that happen?
Happens all the time. The school then has got rid of the problem kid. The league table will probably rise a little bit. The attendance will rise a little bit. And they've got rid of this problematic kid. The parents don't care. So, it's used. How much it's used, I don't know because there's no figures on this, but it definitely goes on. I've seen it. I've got friends who worked in school who tell me they've seen it. It's all unofficial. It's all, this is what you can do and you'll do a better job educating your son and us. And we won't be fining you every month £80.
So I've not seen it used like that, but I wouldn't have been involved in anything like that. But for me, it's the case that most schools in this country are rubbish. They're just poor at discipline, at teaching and learning, all the things that matter. And what they're focusing on right now is all the woke stuff that you and I are talking about all the time. They're focusing on gender issues and trans issues and pushing a very liberal, progressive, social justice warrior narrative on young people that they don't need to be doing because they're not there to impart values, only knowledge. So for me, if I was to have children today, I don't think I would be able to send them to a state school, certainly not a comprehensive school. I would have to homeschool them for that reason. And I think a lot of people in this country misunderstand homeschooling because it's not as big here as it is in the States. But for example, people say often, but you don't want your kids to be on their own all day, stuff like that. But that's not what it means. So it just means you're teaching your kids outside of school. It doesn't mean you're teaching them by yourself. And a lot of homeschoolers have these hubs where they go together with other parents and other children. So they still have social activities, they still have playtime, they still have different people teaching them different things, different experts in different areas. So it can work really well. But also, as an alternative to that, we have the free school system over here. So the idea was that with free schools, parents and teachers can get together and form their own academies with their own principles and kind of set it up with an ideology that they share in an area that a school is needed. And that was a good thing. But even that's been, at the moment, the government are clamping down on free schools and only making it so that multi-academy trusts or big businesses can start free schools. But I love the idea of parents and teachers coming together and starting a school in the local area where they know there's a need for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Children belong to parents. They don't belong to the state. And we need parents more involved in their child's lives, even if the decisions they make turn out to be wrong. But the state makes wrong decisions all the time. I would rather have a parent making wrong decisions that comes from a place of love than having a state make wrong decisions that comes from a place of either finances, incompetence, apathy. I'd always trust a parent more than I'd trust the state.
Yeah, and again, we forget that. So often I hear the same old things of how are kids leaving the school? We're still unable to read. The schools aren't doing a good enough job. It's like, well, if a kid is leaving school unable to read, the parents aren't doing a good enough job either. Like we don't hand responsibility of our children over to our schools and say, okay, they're yours now. It doesn't work like that. They're still your kid. And if they can't read, you haven't been reading to them. You haven't been reading with them. And that's the parent's first job, to look after your kid. And the biggest gap, in schools that I've seen is the social mobility gap. Middle class versus working classes. You can see such a difference. You really can in parents that are interested in the child's education versus parents that aren't. The kids do so much better when parents take an interest in the kids' education. It's clear cut.
Yeah, I've seen some primary schools and spoken to some primary school teachers who tell me that when some kids start at 4 or 5 years old at primary school, Some of them are still wearing nappies because they've not been toilet trained. Some cannot use a knife and fork and sit at a table because they've never used a knife and a fork. You don't need a knife and fork to eat a burger or a chicken wing at home. Um, these basics are not being done. So no wonder they're not looking at education. They've not even done the basic social skills for their child, and that's mainly down to they weren't raised like that. So a lot of it is intergenerational. And then the other thing on top of that is we've got to a stage in society now where every lifestyle is of equal value. So how dare me criticize that lifestyle because they're different but all equally value, and we all know that's rubbish. Certain lifestyles are much better than other lifestyles. That's just a fact.
Yeah, well, we do live in an egalitarian society, don't we, where everything has to be equal and everyone has to be equal. And that's not the real world, really, truly. I see that around me all the time in this argument of the culture wars, in that I genuinely think that British culture is superior to other cultures in some ways. And I think that's not something to be prideful of, but something to acknowledge, because then when we have different cultures integrating into British society, we know which elements of their cultures are good, which elements are less good. For example, there are certain cultures around the world that stone people to death for being homosexual, or say that women aren't allowed to be educated. And I think they are values that we would not find very fair or equal in Britain, or good. So we do have to acknowledge that not everything is equal, and not everyone is equal.
For people who see on GB News, sometimes you have a dog collar on, which obviously means you're part of a church now. You're a deacon at the Free Church of England. Could you tell me a little bit about that? And then we can talk about some of the Christian ideas and ideals behind that.
Yeah, no, interesting observation. I mostly wear my collar on TV on a Sunday because it's the Lord's Day and I come from church. But it's been the responses to that have been just interesting, because for me, as a Christian cleric, I would expect to see a clergyman, whether it's deacon or a priest or a monk, in their clericals. And I've found that Christian faith has become so denormalized in British society that it sparks people as unusual to see someone in their clericals today. I find that quite sad. I wear them as a public witness to say, I'm a follower of Christ and a minister for Christ and his people. But it used to be that every person in this country belonged to a parish and realized that they belonged to a parish and knew that they had a local parish priest who was praying for them. Even if they didn't go to church, they knew who that parish priest was. These days, I don't think we have that anymore. It's very strange what's happened in the de-Christianizing of our country. But yeah, on GB News, my show, The Common Sense Crusade, on Sundays at 3 p.m. at the moment, is my opportunity to, A, be a public witness for Christ, but B, look at current events through a religious perspective. And I think a lot of people we've seen polls from recent research that people are looking for more of a religious take on things, because, probably because of the first point I mentioned, that we've been de-Christianized and we've lost the sense of faith. So people are searching, people are looking. And most other programs on other stations won't touch religion. And if they do, it's always a negative angle. And there are certain religions that they certainly won't touch. So I'm just trying to bring a bit of faith back, I suppose, into the public life.
Mm. What I've noticed, which is everyone's noticed this, Christianity is the only religion that can be mocked, insulted, and anything goes with Christianity. Any other religion, one religion specifically, they'll cut your head off. Other religions, you'd be accused of racism, all sorts of things. But Christianity is the only religion that you can denigrate and mock.
It's interesting, that, isn't it? And they've said traditionally that it's because it's the majority religion, therefore it's punching up, so it's okay. But now Christianity is a minority religion in this country, so it's no longer the case. All it is, they would say that it's because they're liberal and Christianity is old-fashioned and or conservative and therefore wrong. But I think it's probably because they know it's the truth and they're afraid of the truth and they're running from the truth with everything they've got these days. It's quite sad. You're quite right. Other faiths won't be challenged in the same way that Christianity is. I'm fine for people to mock Christianity, but mock other religions too, or don't. Treat us all the same. or otherwise you're exposing your own hypocrisy, and that's what it is.
Yeah, let me put this to you and then tell me if I'm right, wrong, and then we can expand on it. You spent 2 years training to be a priest, and you wanted to join the normal Church of England, C of E. They then didn't want you, heavily criticised you, and then you had to seek another church to join, which was the Free Church of England. I believe, so tell me if I'm wrong, it was your views of Christianity that they didn't want, but your views come from the Bible. And surely the Church of England has the same Bible that the Free Church of England has. Is it that some of the views you hold, which come from the Bible, the Church of England don't hold anymore? And if so, what are those views? The Church of England's gone completely woke and mental. We know that.
Uh, so I did my training within the Church of England structure. I went to a Church of England seminary. The Church of England paid for my training. And then towards the end of it, it became clear that they would do anything that they could to avoid ordaining me. So I put this out there and let people know. And then some bishops got in touch with me and said, this is wrong, what's happening? And we think, if you are called to ordained ministry and the church has confirmed your calling, then you should be ordained. There are other options available. I got introduced to the Free Church of England, which is part of the GAFCON movement, which is actually 80% of Anglicans are within the GAFCON movement of orthodoxy, of believing in the Christian faith as it has always been. But within the liberal West of the UK, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, the basic liberal West, they've lost their way. And the main churches in these places, including the Church of England, haven't changed their teaching, haven't changed the doctrine, haven't changed the Bible, but just ignore it more often. And it started with the ordaining of women, and everyone's like, well, of course we have to do that because it's equal rights. It's like, well, it's not about equal rights. It's about what the Christian faith tells us, that men and women are equal, sure, but different and have different roles in life. And it's a male role to be a leader of the faith. That's not to say that women are less important than men. So it's not about your equality argument. It's just different and complementarian. And that's the Christian faith, that men are priests. And then it went from that to the issues of homosexuality, which the Bible is very clear on, to the issues of marriage, which we're facing right now. As we record this, there's a debate going on in Synod in London, and essentially people within the Church of England are pushing to make homosexual marriage acceptable within the church, and or starting with blessings of same-sex relationships. It's very clear. The Bible says that marriage is between one man and one woman. Therefore, it's heterosexual and monogamous. Now, that's before we make any judgments. Like, there are judgments in the Bible of other relationship types, but that's not making a judgment right there in that court. That's saying that's what marriage is. Now, you can have any other relationship you want, call it whatever you want, but that's not marriage. Marriage is one man, one woman. And then people are saying, oh, but love is love. And I'm like, well, love is not love, first and foremost. There are different types of love. And love within a Christian context is sacrificial. It's self-giving. It's not about you. It's about the other person. And it's about God in this context. But when God ordains something, we as people cannot rewrite it. We cannot change it. And the Church of England wants to be seen as good by the world rather than living by what God says is good. And that will be its downfall. And I think it's a great shame, because I do care about what happens to the established church of this land, because it affects people's lives. And in effect, if you believe in heaven and hell, it affects where they end up if we're leading them astray.
I see part of this problem, especially the Church of England, is if you can imagine a basketball team. So we're a basketball team, these are the rules. We're inclusive, anyone can come and play basketball. Then someone joins the team and says, but I want to kick the ball as well as bounce it. I want to be able to kick it to the side of the court. No, you're not allowed to. They're not the rules. But I'm as equal as you. What I want to do should be accepted as much as. Next thing you know, you're not playing basketball. That person joined that organization to do a specific thing because that's what was advertised. They get in there and all of a sudden, I want to change this. Well, you should have set up your own game and your own organization called Kicking Basketball, and then you could have done what you wanted there. So why join an organization that clearly states what it is for you to then want to change it and turn it into something else?
That is a very good analogy because the church is inclusive. Everyone is welcome, but everyone has to abide by the rules. Everyone has to play by the same rules. That's a good analogy. Because the church is also discriminatory, as inclusive as it is. The faith is discriminatory because Christ says to get into heaven, you need to do certain things. And that is discriminatory, as in you're excluding people that don't do those things. And we can't change them, can't get rid of them. So yeah, I like that. I'll use that analogy in the future.
You can have it. You can have it. Um, let's quickly look at one or two of the so-called controversial topics of being a religious person connected to a church. These topics were not controversial 30, 40 years ago. This is what the vast majority of people in our country believed 30, 40 years ago. Now it's almost heresy. Now it's a hate crime. So let's quickly talk about, for a few minutes, abortion. Abortion now has become a contraceptive, as in, oh, I'm pregnant, get shot of it. But for me, it's a human life. I'm not saying I'm not saying you still shouldn't have an abortion under certain circumstances. I'm not sure where I sit completely. But what I'd like in that debate is some honesty, as in, the first thing we need to acknowledge is that it's a human life. Then we can discuss stuff from there.
Yeah, you're right. It's about honesty. And they're lying again. The liberal movement is just one lie after another, but they're lying because it saves their conscience, because they know it's, of course, they know it's a human life that they're ending, and they are killing it. And we know how these abortions take place. We know that doctors have to sever the limbs and drag the babies out, and sometimes they have to compress them to get them out. There's all kinds of horrible stuff. I mean, we're killing an unborn baby and dragging it out of its mother's womb before its time. That is what we're doing, and we're legalizing it, and we're saying it's okay. We're calling it healthcare. It's not healthcare. It's not care for anyone's health, anyone at all, even the mother. And there is no exception. There is no reason ever to kill an unborn baby. And instead of fighting for the baby's life, they'll fight about the language you use. So you can't call it a baby; it's a fetus. Call it whatever you like. It's a human life, and you're killing it, and that's what it is. And it is that simple. I think it's wicked. I think it's evil, but worse than the act itself. Well, not worse than the act itself, but almost as bad as the act itself is the lie that we've told society that it's all okay, it's acceptable. I mean, even you would say, there's certain conditions that I think it might be acceptable. We've moved so far that even people that see it as murder and see it as ending a people's life give a bit of ground and say, well, actually, yeah, there might be certain conditions, and I can't think of any.
Yeah, I mean, I get that point, and I think it's a very valid point, because if someone said my child is I'm pregnant because of rape, well, that's horrendous and that's a crime. But if a horrendous crime's happened to you, what has the baby done? The baby is an innocent baby inside your womb. Do we punish and murder the baby because something bad's happened to you? Or then we look at severely disabled. So, a woman's pregnant, the scan's been done, the baby is, really, really deformed, probably won't live that long, won't have a good quality of life. So, but then again, we have to ask ourselves, who decides where that line is between which humans are not worthy of life and which humans are worthy of life? Because once we start making those decisions, we may find ourselves on the wrong side of that line at some point. All we have to do is look at, Rwanda in the 90s, Nazi Germany. There'll be times where the people drawing that line will not be the people we want drawing that line.
Absolutely. And that's at the start of life, and we're also seeing it at the end of life now with euthanasia or assisted suicide, assisted killing, assisted dying, whatever you want to call it. We've seen it being pushed in Canada. And first and foremost, to say it's for extreme circumstances only, people that are really suffering, want to end their lives, and no suffering is good. I get that. But the Christian message is that you don't suffer on your own, and Christ is with you in your suffering, and you have eternal reward in heaven afterwards. However, the new liberal argument is, okay, let's end that suffering, done. But then, of course, the slippery slope means that it starts there, but it never ever ends there. And right now in Canada, we're seeing homeless people being offered assisted suicide to end that kind of suffering, when we could probably home them. People whose medical care is too expensive being offered assisted suicide. Veterans being offered assisted suicide. There was one woman who couldn't afford a stair lift, and she had a debilitating not decapitating, what's the word, sorry, Nick? I'm honestly having so many mental blocks today. Debilitating illness. She couldn't get up and downstairs. They offered her assisted suicide. It's like, this is going crazy now. That, elderly people who feel like they're a burden on society or on their children will opt for it. There are so many circumstances, and we're seeing even young people as young as early 20s. I think there was one chap who said, I haven't had a girlfriend, and he was so depressed because of this that he wanted to end his life. Like, you don't know what's going to happen in the next 80 years, for goodness sake. And it's just murder at birth, murder at the other end of life. It's all wrong, is what it is. We've normalized it.
We, as a society, we used to be a compassionate society and protect the vulnerable. We're now not a compassionate society anymore. Now it's now you have a drain on society. So therefore, maybe after we kill you, maybe you could be some good society because your kidneys are worth 50 grand each, and your retinas are worth 1,500. So maybe
your stem cells.
yeah. So as a socialist society, you'll do better for us if we kill you because we're going to make money out of you. Again, who draws those lines? And once you start putting money into the equation as well, humans are easily corrupted by money and power, and anyone can see where that can go wrong.
Yeah, but the worst thing about all of this is the opinion that we've just put forward is the one that's considered extreme now.
My final point about the church is let's talk about gay marriage. I was never in favour of gay marriage. I was quite in favour of what did they call it? The step before civil partnerships. I was quite in favour of that because my philosophy is, who am I to dictate to other people how they should live their lives? Because I wouldn't want someone dictating to me. And I openly admit I'm probably wrong in lots of things I say, do, and think. So therefore, where does my right come from to dictate? So civil partnerships, if people want to live together, they want to share their pensions together, they want to make sure each other's looked after when the other person dies. I'm okay with that because they're sovereign individuals and should be able to make those decisions. When it came to marriage, it was like, it's the basketball thing again. You're now changing this organization that's been around for tens of thousands of years, probably, and you're changing it to something that it's not. What's your take on that?
Well, for me, marriage is a sacrament. It's the sacrament of holy matrimony, and there are reasons for marriage. The first reason is procreation. The second reason is fornication without sin. And the third reason is the good of the community. And gay marriage doesn't cover those, so it's just not marriage. I mean, you can do whatever you want in the secular world. You can have a civil union, civil partnership, or you can have a gay marriage within the civil society if you want to. But within the context of the church, it's not a thing. Make a new word for it if you want to. But marriage is between one man and one woman. It's very simple. It's a loving union of two people becoming one flesh under the eyes of God. I don't see why people are making a problem out of it. And especially as I think it comes down to sin, right? So a lot of it is people don't want to be called sinners, but they forget that we're all sinners. I'm a sinner, you're a sinner, everyone is a sinner. We all have our own sins, and we sin often and regularly, and that's because we're all fallen. That's the story of Christianity. But sex outside of marriage is a sin, and people don't want to be seen as sinners or thought of as sinners. But if you're having sex outside of marriage, you are sinning. Whether you're male, female, heterosexual, homosexual, it doesn't make a difference. That's the point of marriage. But when you are a man and a woman married, that is the only time that sex is not sin. And I think what's happening here is that homosexual couples want to be able to fornicate without it being seen as sin, but that will never be the case. Even if they get married, under the eyes of God, it is always sin for two men or two women to fornicate. And there's no way around that. God made those rules, not us. And if we try to change them, we're making gods of ourselves.
It goes back to what we said before, which is people now don't want, well, every lifestyle now is being told it's as equal value of every other lifestyle. And we know that's not true. And my opinion is not worth the same value as someone else's opinion, depending what we're talking about. But you're right, it's about people now. What everybody wants the cake and eat it. So I want my liberty. I want freedom. I want to do what I want when I want. But I want all these traditional organizations to embrace me as well.
Yeah, embracing and affirming, and that's not how we help people. That's not compassionate or kind to lie to people all the time. That's the trans movement's lying. This movement too is lying. If we love people, we should say, look, you're a grown adult. You make your own decisions on how you live your life in a free and liberal country. However, if you do this, you are harming your soul. And here's a better way to live. And I know lots and lots of gay people who live chaste lives, Christ-like lives, and are happier for it. And actually, they have a close relationship with Jesus Christ, and that's a good thing for them. I know gay people that don't have that, and they're just happy in different ways. That's a good thing for them. But people have to find their own way in life within the faith or without the faith, but they cannot change the faith to match their lifestyle. That way round just doesn't work.
And that's a good point to end, because I think that's what the woke are always trying to do. They're trying to change society to fit in with them, instead of either fitting in with society or influencing society. So that's the new path to go. And they've sort of done that, but they've done it in a secretive, bullying sort of way. Anything else you want to say before we go, Calvin? People can find you on GB News on Sundays.
Yes, Sunday is 3 p.m. on GB News. I'm on all the social medias, Calvin Robinson. I've got a Substack, Calvin Robinson. Just go to calvinrobinson.com, all my links are there. But I slipped up on one wording. I used the word good where I shouldn't have used the word good. People know what I mean. But yes, follow me online if you want to, and come to my church on Sunday at 10 a.m.
And where is your church?
Halsden, Northwest London.
Northwest London. And you just said then people can go online as well for the service.
No online services.
Right.
Rooted in place and community. So if you're in Northwest London and you're looking for a church, come to Halsden.
Right, fantastic. Cheers, Calvin, and hopefully we'll chat again soon.
Absolute pleasure, mate. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.